Good morning. I'm going to move this mic a little bit, so hopefully that doesn't cause a problem, but I don't want it to get bumped by
Come on up, everybody.
All right, so speakers and people standing in support, please come on up. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Communications Director Brianna Aho with the Governor's Office. We're just going to give our speakers and guests here a moment to come up, and please get in tight. Feel free to get in front of the sign so you're visible. Yep. And for members of the media, I'm just going to go through the list of speakers and then give spellings so everybody has what they need. So that's okay. We'll be shuffling around a little bit, getting it balanced on both sides. So first you're going to hear from Thomas Reynolds. Thomas, Thomas, Reynolds, Rewnolds. He's the CEO of Northwest Harvest. Then you'll hear from Governor Bob Ferguson. Then Treasurer Mike Policiotti. Then Ephraim Fizaha from Boon Boona Coffee. So that's Ephraim, E-F-R-E-M, Fizaha, F-E-S-A-H-A, Boon Boona, B-O-O-N, B-O-O-N-A Coffee. Then UFCW member Matt Lutton, L-U-T-T-O-N. And then Port of Seattle Commissioner Ryan Calkins, Ryan, R-Y-A-N, last name Calkins, C-A-L-K-I-N-S. So those will be your speakers today. And with that, I will introduce you to turn it over to Thomas Reynolds from Northwest Harvest. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for being at Northwest Harvest Soto Community Market, a free grocery store here in Seattle for everyone seeking food resources. I'm Thomas Reynolds, the CEO. At Northwest Harvest, our mission is growing food justice through collective action. That means not only distributing food for those who need it today, but also pressing for systems change so fewer families need emergency food in the future. Today we're here because of one of those systemic issues, tariffs. They act as regressive tax hitting low-income households the hardest. Low-income households spend a greater share of their income on imported goods, which are often the most affordable options. When tariffs drive up those prices, families are left with fewer choices and less food. And we're seeing the impact of this already. Rising food insecurity, increased demand at food banks, growing pressure on our statewide network of food pantry partners, about 400 partners. We're responding by continuing to prioritize fresh produce, affordable staples, and local purchasing of Washington agriculture to avoid tariff-related costs. And we know responding to urgent need isn't enough. We need policy solutions that protect communities from economic harm and ensure access to nutritious food. We're honored to welcome Governor Bob Ferguson, whose leadership continues to elevate the voices of Washington communities and bring attention to the real-world local consequences of national policy decisions.
Thanks, Thomas. Give a round of applause to Thomas and the great team here at Northwest Harvest. We so appreciate everybody here at Northwest Harvest, not just for welcoming us today, which we appreciate, but for all the really fantastic work that you do for so many Washingtonians. So thank you, and to the team. Thank you all for being here. Washington, as I suspect all of you know, is one of the most trade-dependent states in the country. In 2024, we had $58 billion worth of exports. We had $62 billion worth of imports. The illegal tariffs imposed by President Trump will, as Thomas made clear, affect all Washingtonians through higher prices, business disruptions, and much more. Now, we've sounded this alarm before. In fact, some of the folks who are with me today joined me for a press conference a while ago when the tariffs were first coming out. In May, I led a coalition with a large number of individuals, public and private partners, state and local officials, labor unions and businesses, economic development interests, to file what we call a friend of the court brief in litigation going on in federal court that challenges the president's authority to unilaterally issue these tariffs without any approval from Congress. We said back at that time that the tariffs were illegal. So far, the courts have shared that interpretation. The trial court agreed with us and said the tariffs were illegal. And just in the last few days, the Federal Court of Appeals, in a 7-4 decision, affirmed that, declaring they were unconstitutional and illegal. The Trump administration is appealing that to the United States Supreme Court. So we expect the Supreme Court to take up that case and issue a decision in the coming months. But these tariffs are illegal, and the reason we filed an amicus brief was to make sure that Washington State's story was being told before the courts that are making a decision about these tariffs, to make sure that the impact's here. Now look, at the time we had that press conference, we had business folks here talking about how chaotic these tariffs were, they change from day to day, and how as a business person, how do you run a business if you can't project with any certainty what your costs are going to be? Well now, thanks to a report done by the Office of Finance and Management, more about them in a moment, that draws an even clearer picture of these tariffs and the adverse impacts to Washingtonians. So according to this nonpartisan analysis, and again, it's being released today by our Office of Financial Management. And I just want to say a great thank you to the folks who do that work and all the work they do for the state of Washington. But part of their work is providing projections to us, so we, as a state, can budget accordingly. And so they've taken an analysis on what these tariffs, fully implemented, would mean to Washington State. So just to give you a few of the data points. And what we're talking about here is Liberation Day tariffs, if fully implemented, to 2029. We have another data point I'll share in a moment, just to be clear and sort of the numbers we're talking about. But it will result in significantly higher costs for Washington families, the loss of tens of thousands of jobs, and billions of dollars lost in state revenue. So those Liberation Day tariffs, again, if fully implemented, have what we call an effective tariff rate of 27%, which is shockingly high. There is no scenario in which these tariffs are good for Washingtonians. And don't be fooled by the administration. Washington's working families and businesses and the state will bear the cost of these tariffs. Before I go into any more numbers, I also want to say we're joined by a number of folks here. You'll be hearing from just a few, but I so appreciate the members of my cabinet who are here, the folks who contributed to this report, folks from OFM, of course, local elected officials, business leaders, labor leaders, you name it, are all here, and we deeply appreciate it. But let me give you a few points. So number one, if the full tariffs are in effect through 2029, we expect up to a 16% increase for groceries over the next 2 years. Now just to break that down, different families have different sizes and different needs for groceries. So for some, the number I'm going to give would be larger, but let's say you spend $200 a week on groceries. Again, I want to be clear, many families spend a lot more than that, depending on the size of your family and where you shop and where you get your groceries. But just to give you a sense of scale, if you spend $200 a week on your groceries, you'll be spending an extra $128 per month on those groceries as a result of these tariffs. We also predict a 7% spike in the cost of clothes and shoes in the next year, a 14% increase in natural gas prices, which of course push up utility bills, and an increase of 25% in the cost of used cars. No matter how much the president wants us to believe that foreign countries bear the cost of these tariffs, that's simply not true. Multiple studies make clear that the actual costs are passed on to you, consumers in Washington State. The Budget Lab at Yale looked at the Trump tariffs just recently, back in June. They found that up to 80% of tariff costs, 80%, are passed on to consumers. As costs rise and spending slows, those tariffs will cost Washington jobs. The president's tariffs, again, if fully implemented, will cut up to 31,900 jobs from Washington State alone. Trade-dependent Washington industries like agriculture, food processing, and aerospace will be especially hard hit. The impacts to our most trade-dependent industries will have ripple effects. Ports, and you'll hear from Port Commissioner Ryan Calkins momentarily, ports will see slowdowns, reducing jobs in logistics, warehousing, trucking, and more. Trade drives our economy. Not surprisingly, the report predicts that these tariffs will also cause a slowdown in our state economy. To be specific, it predicts our quarterly growth rate will decline by 1.2 to 1.8%. Now, all those numbers I gave you are Liberation Day tariffs fully implemented. Donald Trump has been so chaotic, right, you can't predict anything that's going to last over the course of this time. So the team ran another alternative number. They looked at the date of August 7th, so just a little bit less than a month ago. And what they looked at was what was actually happening with the tariffs, what was implemented for the tariffs effective on August 7th, and said, what if we take that number and just run that through 2029, right? Presumably it's going to change, but we took what was actually in effect on August 7th. On August 7th, the effective tariff rate was 18.6%. Just to give you a sense of scale, That would be that is the highest effective tariff rate since 1933, the Great Depression. So the team looked at some numbers for that, August 7th, what was in place for tariffs at that moment in time. If those were extended through 2029, Washington stands to lose between 20 and 25,000 jobs. We just went through a very difficult legislative session. We had to make difficult choices to balance our budget. We're going to face another difficult session ahead. Our early revenue forecasts show another shortfall. In addition, federal cuts from the big bad betrayal budget bill will be billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid, to SNAP benefits. The list goes on and on and on. The president's tariffs will only make this dire situation worse. To be specific, the report estimates that these tariffs, fully implemented, would lead to the loss of over $2 billion in general fund revenue over the next 4 years. So look, we have a challenging situation with these tariffs, and that is why we are taking that on in court and filing a brief there to articulate these concerns to the Supreme Court if they choose to take the case. It's why we are amplifying the message of what's happening with these tariffs so people are aware of the potential impacts. And it's why I'm so appreciative of everybody who's joined us today to share their perspectives. And that runs the gamut of folks working in our grocery stores to our state treasurer and everything else. This is going to impact people all across our state. It's going to impact businesses all across our state. It's going to impact families all across our state. And just the last thing I'll say, and probably gone on too long, is just wherever I'm traveling the state and tariffs come up, and they do all the time, the one thing I hear over and over from business folks is, Bob, how can I run a business, okay, if I can't predict with any certainty what my costs are going to be? And these tariffs literally seem to change day to day, week to week, month to month. That's no way for me to run a business. And this is going to have a significant impact for our state. That's why we're amplifying this. That's why we're working so hard to take them on. And I just so appreciate everybody's hard work on this issue. With that, I'm going to turn to our state treasurer, Mike Pleciotti, who's had to talk to me more about state tariffs than he probably ever wanted to. So Mike Pleciotti, everybody.
Well, thank you, Governor. I'm very pleased to be here today, and obviously pleased thankful for the work of your team at OFM for their leadership and this insightful economic analysis that's being released today. I'm also glad to have joined the Governor in his legal briefing in those previous federal cases, and obviously the Office of State Treasurer will join in the briefing as well to the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, when the President first announced his tariffs in January, I said that his tariffs at the time were only serving his political interests, not economic interests. And unfortunately, now we are seeing the real economic consequences that are taking place of these recklessly imposed tariffs, costs that will make it more difficult for households, businesses, and state treasuries. This is especially true in an economically and trade-dependent state like ours. You know, my office advised legislators in February of the upcoming trade war impacts to our state finances, and now through this thoughtful OFM analysis, we know the pressure on our state's treasury may be significant, as much as $2.2 billion by 2029. We're not here today because we're surprised that these reckless trade policies are going to damage local budgets or economies. That pretty much everyone knew as early as January. We're here because the federal government has offloaded these costs of its essentially haphazard economic policies to the states, to local governments. We're the ones that are going to have to pick up the costs associated with this. And this spring I made it a point to meet with community leaders all around the state, Ellensburg, Ephrata, Pasco, Yakima. The agricultural industry is going to be particularly hit hard as a result of these economic tariffs. And these are folks in central and eastern Washington that are economically reliant on both sides, both in terms of the imports that they have to deal with related to fertilizer costs from Canada, which 90% of our fertilizer comes from Canada. But then they're also being hit on the export side as those exports are going overseas, which is to say that for Washington's key industries, they will have a negative impact on both sides of the ledger. It will also increase prices and threaten jobs. You know, it'll be more expensive to make products, it'll be more expensive to sell products. This trade policy chaos has far-reaching consequences that are having a major impact here close at home. So to be clear, that this is a threat that is recognized by independent analysis from outside of our state as well. So while we have very thoughtful independent analysis from the Governor's Budget Office, our 3 credit rating agencies have identified the risks to the tariffs to our local economy and our vulnerability as a state that is particularly reliant on trade. But of course, economies don't stop at state borders, and Washington is not unique in being negatively impacted by the president's tariffs. Sadly, many other states and business leaders, however, are fearful to speak out about the economic harm of the president's economic policies. And that's why I really appreciate the governor's leadership here today, because the Trump administration is deliberately creating a climate of chaos. These constantly moving targets are the opposite of good government or smart economic policy. The only responsible maneuver in the face of this recklessness is to continue to prioritize financial strength and stability, being prepared so that our state is insulated from the worst instincts of the other Washington. I look forward to continuing to work with the governor, the legislature, and our local partners to create a path forward to survive these economic risks that are on the horizon. And as I've done for months, I will continue to call on Congress to do its job and assert its congressional oversight over tariffs. But to be clear, until Congress decides to reassert its authority on trade and to be the check on the unilateral power of the president, the cost will continue to rise for families, business, and for budgets. Thank you very much.
Grateful to be here with Bob Ferguson, Governor Bob Ferguson, sorry. But truly appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation or to speak about the impacts of tariffs. My name is Efrem Fasaha, CEO and founder of Boon Boona Coffee. And when I started Boon Boona, was 13 years ago, the intent and the desire was always to source intentionally from Africa, bring coffee here to my neighborhood that I grew up in, and to showcase that traditional approach to East African coffee, to the capital of coffee, which is here in Seattle, our state. But you know, it's been a great journey. I've been very fortunate with it over these last few years, having grown this very small business. We're moving coffee out of the trunk of my car around the city to now being fortunate enough to have 4 brick and mortar locations and in several grocery stores. But that is coming to you know, unfortunately a really hard spot, and tough decisions are being made about expansion and what to do as a result of these impacts. You know, coffee is unique. I guess I'm biased on that, but coffee is unique. 99% of coffee is produced outside of the United States. As a result, with 10% minimum being tacked on tariffs, and with that number also fluctuating so often, even on the continent of Africa, 10 to 15% we'll see that sometimes, but especially in countries like Brazil, which is the largest producer of coffee at 50%, what we've now seen is a dramatic increase as well on the sea market. Coffee is the second most moved commodity in the world, and with that impact to Brazil and to others, it's also increasing the raw cost of the good itself, in addition to the tariff that is being implemented here. So true, yeah, when we receive coffee now, we are constantly just worried about what that final price will be, because while it's on the water, it's undetermined, but once it hits here, then we're finding out what that is. And sometimes we hold our breath, maybe it's not implemented, but the reality is that, you know, coffee represents 40% of of what we spend, 40% of our budget. So to have an impact of this amount really does throw us off in kind of what it is that we're able to do. So expansion is definitely placed on pause. Anything that we've committed to, we are going to continue to do so. But when it comes to, you know, do we expand further beyond where we're at, it is definitely something that we hesitate about. It's also something where, you know, as a small business, it's not something that you can flip on a dime and say, oh, hey, I'm getting tacked on this 10%, I'm going to push this through. It's not that easy. We have customers, we have guests, we have loyal customers that we've been fortunate enough to serve, and when they hear something like that, that's not, well, quite well received, and we'll feel it when we hear about the cost of a latte. But similarly, even when it comes to the larger retailers and other grocery outlets that we partner with, it does take 90 days minimum to implement those prices. And so what's happening is we're absorbing that cost for some time. And then we also, as a small business, don't necessarily or can't even necessarily afford to show that full cost, because that might mean we're pushed out of the shelves. It's something that we have to absorb as well. And it's somewhere it now becomes a cost that we're also saying, okay, is it worth continuing on to do so? And so outside of just coffee, we also fill it in our compostable bags that we use. Those come from Southeast Asia, and as a result, that cost is being felt as well. And so it isn't just on the coffee, it is on all the other factors associated that go into the coffee as well. And so I appreciate this conversation and this opportunity, and look forward to what's to come here. Thanks.
Thanks, Efren. Appreciate it.
Morning, everybody. I'm Matt Ludden. I'm a 10-figured meat cutter from the Greenwood and Fred Meyer. Around the holidays, I stuff the meat case with standing rib roasts, bone-in hams, boneless hams. And these cuts, they become the centerpieces for family dinners. It's the food that the kids come home to and they enjoy. The problem here is that we import a lot of that beef from Canada. And we also get a lot of the ham from Canada. These tariffs will likely increase the price of those special items, plus many staples, cereal, milk, fruit, and nuts. And I worry that the giant corporations who own our grocery stores will use these higher import taxes as cover to hike up prices on these items even higher, just like they did during the COVID pandemic. During the trial over the merger between the Kroger and Albertsons, which our union blocked with the help of then Attorney General Bob Ferguson, the CEOs admitted to hiking up the prices of milk and eggs beyond inflation. To quote former Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen, "Inflation is always good in our business." I worry these higher tariffs mean our customers will start pulling back. Just the other day, I had a customer tell me they not only need to cut back on the centerpiece cuts, but to have a smaller package of even ground beef. If these tariffs raise the prices even further, what are my customers supposed to do? I worry that skimpier suppers for me and my customers means skimpier paychecks for me and my coworkers. I worry that these companies will start closing more stores. Kroger just announced the closure of 6 stores in our region, citing low performance. How many more low performers will these tariffs create? That's why we all need to stand together to make sure that the political power plays and corporate greed don't turn our family dinners and our livelihoods into the next thing on the chopping block. Thank you.
Ryan, are you hiding now? Come on in. Yeah, you're good.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming this morning. As a dad who just put his 3 kids back into school yesterday, I can assure you that the anecdotes back up the data. All that back-to-school supplies, all those cleats I needed to buy for the fall season, they're all more expensive right now, and it's only going to get worse. But I'm going to try to take us to a little bit higher level and talk to you about what's happening at the Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma. I'm the current Commission Vice President and a managing member of the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is one of the United States' largest trade gateways. We moved over 3.3 million containers last year, both inbound and outbound. Our partners in trade and in moving those goods rely on a few key things to do business. The first is a fluid supply chain, and the second is market certainty. Policy that disrupts either of those, and therefore disrupts the hundreds of thousands of jobs in Washington state that rely on trade, should be thoughtfully considered and carefully crafted. At no point have the tariffs being issued by the current administration met either of those standards. Their haphazard announcement and implementation has created a months-long environment of volatility and uncertainty, pushing businesses further and further into unknown territory. The report today illuminates data that is not surprising to us. We've been tracking our own numbers closely and meeting regularly with stakeholders, importers, and exporters, and have heard firsthand about tariff impacts on their daily operations. Recently, I also had the opportunity to sit down with some local small businesses and hear about what they are facing as a result of this tariff war. From lower sales and difficulty importing merchandise and big ticket items, to difficulty accessing machine parts and repairs, these businesses were feeling both the pressure themselves and seeing how that pressure impacts their customers. They didn't want to raise prices because they, as businesses, also are members of their own community, and they understand the impacts on their customers. They were implementing emergency strategies to hopefully keep their doors open a little longer and weather this self-inflicted storm. The data also show their stories writ large and emphasize what we already knew, that uncertainty is not good for business, it's not good for our ports, it's not good for our state, our workers, or our people. We hope that continuing to put forward these stories and the data behind them can lead to thoughtful reconsideration of these damaging policies. We will continue to do our part to learn, to listen, and to advocate. Thank you, Governor, for the opportunity to speak, and I'm going to turn it back over to you.
That's right. Thanks so much. First, join me in thanking all of our speakers. And especially Matt and Ephraim, thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives as well. I can vouch for Boon Boon having excellent coffee. I've been there myself, seen you there, which I so appreciate. Looking forward to your questions. I'll just add, I think, Ryan, you mentioned, referred to as a self-inflicted storm, I think is a phrase you used. That's what's so maddening about this, right, is it's all so unnecessary. The resulting chaos is just so unnecessary. So, but again, we look forward to your questions, and who wants to go first? Yes. Yep. Yep. And feel free to stay close. Yeah, don't go too far away. Yeah.
Just wondering if you're working with other food banks in the region to prepare for this increased need, or is this something you even can't prepare for?
Yeah, the question was about preparing and working with other food banks in the region and around the country. Northwest Harvest is one of the co-founders of a national right to food movement, and we work with food banks and other food justice organizations across the country. And of course, the impact of inflation is really harming low-income households, and we are coordinating with others. We have a partner network of about 400 partners. We work in every county in Washington state. We see more people going to food pantries in every county in Washington state. And the challenging part is, as demand goes up, supply of food available is staying the same. And so there's hand-wringing, but we need to find the ways forward. I think one of the great ways forward is to call upon Washington agriculture, who traditionally gives many millions of pounds of food, and will be asking for our neighbors for more help in the future.
Governor, I have a question about the jobs. You touched on this, but can you talk about which industries? Does the report show you which jobs are most at stake?
Yeah, and so I'll may open also to Katie Chapman-C, who's here from OFM, in case she wants to elaborate from the report. But as I think I emphasized in my points, hey, industries like, for example, aerospace and others, agriculture, we have or real heavy here in Washington State, are going to be disproportionately impacted. There's no two ways around that. And I think the projections are over 30,000 loss of jobs. That's at the full tariffs. But even at the level at the August 7th, moving forward, I think that number was 20 to 25,000 loss of jobs. So that'll be something from a state perspective to see what we can do in terms of our policies to help out those industries. Katie, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add in terms of, feel free to come to the microphone. This is Katie Chapman-C.
Yeah, and I think we'd be happy, the author of the report and our focusing research director are here, and we can also walk you through some of the industry-specific data that's in the report for both the scenarios that are included there. But I know manufacturing, particularly light manufacturing, is also a place where we would expect to see bigger impacts as well. So, thanks.
Thank you. Yes?
Governor, is it possible that Washington could join with other states to resist federal tariff policy in some way, similar to West Coast governors announcing that they would issue their own vaccine guidance?
Great. I'll repeat the question just in case the folks are watching on the live stream to hear it. So the question went to, hey, is there a way for Washington to join with other states to sort of push back against the tariffs, similar to what we announced yesterday regarding public health, Washington, Oregon, California joined together to push back? I mean, I guess what I would say is, I am open to anything I can do as a governor to mitigate the impacts of these tariffs on Washingtonians and Washington businesses. And in doing that, as you might imagine, just like in the public health arena, right, there are a lot of conversations that take place amongst the Democrat governors about these issues and what we can do working together. So, I don't want to get out ahead of those conversations, but obviously those are things we discuss to see if there are avenues to do that. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, like it does for that alliance around public health. That was a really logical one that we think will make a big difference. Sometimes, while we're aligned, obviously, in our views, there's not really an alliance that kind of can truly make a difference. That said, we are aligned on things like, hey, taking on the legal actions we're taking on, right? That there are things that the states are working on together, whether that's the governors, the AGs, state treasurers certainly are having their conversations, and local elected officials at every level. That does happen. So I don't think I have anything to announce in terms of tariffs with other states specifically, but I think what I can say is that those are ongoing conversations we have about any of these major policies, for lack of a better word, or decisions coming from the federal government that are impacting our state. Yeah.
Do you concerns that the taxes the legislature passed this past session will have a similar effect on the economy?
So the question is, do I think the impact of taxes will have a similar impact on the economy? What I would say about from the last legislative session, and I said this at the time, signed the budget. Look, we had a challenging budget situation with a $16 billion shortfall. There's no easy way out of that, right? There's no easy way out of that. And if we got a lot of people in this room, if there's 70 people in this room, I'm confident that if the 70 people here all can make the final decision about how to balance that budget, there'd be 70 different outcomes. How much revenue, how much cuts, what cuts they would be. There's no one right way to do that. That said, given the challenge we were facing, I think the balance between the revenue and the streamlining our government and making difficult choices on reductions was a balance that made sense. It's my hope going forward. We are having conversations, KD, with businesses since the budget was adopted. We're working with businesses around those revenues that were adopted to see if there can be changes to those that would mitigate those impacts. But look, anytime you're raising impacts on businesses, that's not a good thing. That wasn't what I wanted to do when I was running for governor. It wasn't what I wanted to do in my first term, and we just think we have to be upfront about that, and I'll just add one more thing, which makes it especially important that in the way we do budgeting going forward, we avoid that from happening again as much as we can. And I think my views were pretty clear about the way the state has budgeted in the past, anticipating revenue that was not realistic, was not grounded in reality. We changed that. The budget I signed, I insisted, had to be based on actual revenue growth that the experts tell us we can anticipate, not based on something else. We maintained our rainy day reserve fund, which helped preserve our AAA bond rating in conversations I had with the state treasurer, with those rating agencies, to make sure we maintain that AAA bond rating. So I think in a challenging budget, we made good decisions on how moving forward we budget to do our best to avoid additional harms.
And a quick follow-up on that, you mentioned the impact tariffs will have on the state and local budgets.
Yeah.
Would you consider withholding federal income tax, and how would you go about that if so?
Yeah, I guess what I'll say about the concept out there of withholding federal income tax, I don't want to get too specific this time. What I'll say is that there are lots of conversations about different options the state of Washington can take to deal with the chaos from the Trump administration. And so, I think you'll see some proposals in the next legislative session, some action to do our best to mitigate those harms. And that's just a daily part of life as a governor, in a state like Washington, that you're just dealing with that chaos, whether it's budget cuts or these tariffs. So again, I don't want to get out ahead of any decisions, but what I can say is that we're looking at all options that are before us to mitigate the harms and to make sure we're preserving Washington State and our values. Yes.
About being on the water with your products, there you talked about coffee.
Yeah.
Can you address how if you're on the water with your product and you bought it from the port at one price, is the tariff going to kick in when you bought it at that port, or will it kick in when you deliver it at Seattle Center?
Oh, I may have to defer to someone a little more expert. Ryan, I'm going to maybe turn to Ryan, but others, if they have expertise, you mind just repeating the question, Ryan, if that's okay?
So the question is, at what point are the tariffs, I guess, sort of levied against the product? And unfortunately, there's uncertainty around that, too. We were waiting for guidance on the earlier rounds of tariffs, and so businesses weren't sure whether they were going to have to account for that. But typically speaking, if it has left the country of origin, and the tariff kicks in, it is exempt from that tariff. So it's from the point of origin.
Thanks for that question. Appreciate it. Any other final question? And by the way, I should mention that before I take your question, the speakers are all available for one-on-ones. If you have an interest in a follow-up one-on-one, we're happy to do that. Yeah.
I just wanted to see if you had any comment to the state's GOP chairman just putting out a statement.
Oh, this should be good. This should be good. This should be always entertaining. Yeah. What has he got?
That he feels that this focus on tariffs is an attempt to distract away from the budget. Do you have any response to that?
I mean, what I will say is I'm someone who believes in data and actual numbers and being prepared. And so, look, if the chairman has a critique of the actual numbers, looking forward to hearing that. I'm not hearing that in his statement. He's not challenging the numbers. He's not saying this isn't real. He's not saying tariffs are good for business. If he does, have him come on down to Boon Boona Coffee Shop. I'd invite him to come on down, right? Maybe have a conversation with the folks in our grocery stores who are actually there talking to the customers about what choices they're making in the meat they're purchasing. Maybe have those conversations. Easy to put out a press release and a statement. I get that. That's what he does. I get that. But look, as a governor and as leaders in our communities, right, we need to engage in reality, okay? And reality is what these numbers say. And look, we're going to, and I think the questions go with this. We'll be taking steps through the budget process to what we can do to mitigate these harms, to anticipate loss of general fund revenues, and welcome anyone who wants to be constructive in that effort. Thanks, appreciate it. Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, everybody. Again, once again, thanks to our hosts so much for opening up this really wonderful facility to all of us, and for all the, most importantly, all the wonderful work you do. We so appreciate it. To everybody who's here, we so appreciate it, and happy to take additional questions one-on-one if folks have them. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Yeah, great job. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for your help. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Ryan, actually, appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah. It worked out great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah, great job. That's not too far from me. I'm on